Most people think fear is a reflex. They think when a shotgun gets racked back, you scream, you drop, or you run. But in the underworld, we know the truth. Silence is the loudest sound in the room. When three masked men stormed the busiest diner in Brooklyn on a rainy Tuesday, 40 people hit the floor. Only one person remained standing. She didn't have a weapon. She didn't have a badge. She just had a pot of coffee and a secret so dark it would bring the city's most ruthless Mafia don to his knees. This isn't a story about a hero. It's a story about a monster realizing he'd just met his match. The rain in Chicago doesn't wash the city clean. It just makes the grime slicker. It was 11:43 p.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of night where the streetlights hummed with a nervous energy. Julian Moretti sat in the back booth of the Midnight Fork, a diner that smelled of pine cleaner and stale grease. To the rest of the world, Julian was a logistics consultant. To the FBI, he was a ghost. To the families that ran the city, he was the architect. He didn't break thumbs. He broke infrastructures. He was the head of the Moretti crime family, a man who had inherited a kingdom of blood and turned it into an empire of silence. He was there for a meeting that hadn't happened yet. His second-in-command, Marcus, was late. Julian hated lateness. It showed a lack of discipline. He swirled the black coffee in his mug, his eyes scanning the room. A trucker eating pie. A couple arguing in hushed tones. And the waitress. Her name tag said Elena. She looked tired. Not the sleepy kind of tired, but the soul-deep exhaustion of someone who has been running for a very long time. She was blonde, or maybe she wasn't. The harsh fluorescent lights washed her out. She moved efficiently, wiping counters with a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. Then the bell above the door jingled. Not softly. It was kicked open. 3 men. Ski masks. Sawed-off shotguns. The classic amateur hour. Everybody, down. Now wallets and phones on the table. The leader screamed, his voice cracking. He was high. Julian could tell by the twitch in the man's neck. Chaos erupted. The couple in the corner screamed. The trucker dove under the table, knocking over his water. Julian didn't move. He simply slid his right hand under the table, gripping the Sig Sauer P320 taped beneath the booth. He didn't draw it yet. He calculated the angles. 3 targets. Distance 20 feet. He could drop all 3 in 2.4 seconds. But before he could pull the trigger, he saw her. Elena didn't scream. She didn't drop the coffee pot. She didn't even flinch. While the rest of the diner was a symphony of panic, Elena stood behind the counter perfectly still. She looked at the gunman nearest to her, a twitchy kid waving a pistol at the register. "Open it! Open the register!" the kid screamed, shoving the gun into her face. The barrel was inches from her nose. Most civilians would be begging for their lives. Julian watched, fascinated, as Elena's eyes shifted. She wasn't looking at the gun. She was looking at the safety switch. It was on. "It's jammed," Elena said. Her voice was flat, monotone. The gunman blinked. "What? The register?" She lied smoothly, her heart rate seemingly resting at 60 beats per minute. "It jams when it rains. The humidity makes the old keys stick. If you shoot me, nobody opens it, and the cops are already 3 minutes out because the silent alarm is automatic." It was a bluff. Julian knew it. The Midnight Fork didn't have a silent alarm. It was a dive. The gunman panicked, looking back at his leader. "Boss, she says." "Shut her up," the leader roared, racking his shotgun. The leader marched toward the counter. He raised the stock of the shotgun to pistol whip her. This was the moment. Julian tightened his grip on his weapon. He couldn't let a civilian die, not when he was sitting right there. But Elena moved. It wasn't a martial arts move. It wasn't flashy. It was barely a movement at all. As the stock came down, she simply shifted her weight 6 inches to the left. The wood slammed into the counter where her head had been a fraction of a second ago. In the same motion, she poured the pot of steaming hot coffee directly onto the leader's wrist. Not his face, but the wrist holding the trigger. The leader howled, dropping the gun. "Table 4!" Elena said, her voice cutting through the screams. Julian realized she was talking to him. She hadn't looked at him, but she knew he was the only one not hiding. "Table 4. Catch," she said. She kicked the shotgun across the linoleum floor. It spun perfectly, sliding under the booths and coming to a rest right at Julian's feet. Julian didn't pick it up. He didn't need to. The sound of sirens wailed in the distance, real sirens this time. The robbers, spooked by the burned leader, and the eerie calm of the waitress, scrambled. They grabbed the tip jar and ran out the door, leaving the shotgun behind. Silence returned to the diner. The couple was sobbing. The cook was peeking out from the kitchen. Elena picked up a rag. She wiped the spilled coffee off the counter. She didn't shake. She didn't cry. She walked over to Julian's table, picked up the shotgun from the floor, cracked the breech to unload it, and placed it on the table like it was a dirty plate. "Refill?" she asked, holding up the fresh pot. Julian stared at her. For the first time in 10 years, the architect was speechless. "Who are you?" he whispered. "I'm Eleanor," she said, pouring the black liquid into his cup. "And you owe me for the floor show. That'll be $5. She walked away, leaving the most dangerous man in Chicago wondering if he had just met the devil or an angel sent to bury him. 24 hours later, Julian was in his office at the top of the Millennium Tower. The city of Chicago sprawled beneath him, a grid of gold and black. "We found nothing," Marcus said, tossing a manila folder onto the mahogany desk. Julian spun his chair around. "Define nothing." "I mean nothing, boss. No social media, no credit history prior to 3 years ago, no high school yearbook photos. Elena Vance is a ghost. She appeared in Chicago 3 years ago, got a job at the diner, pays her rent in cash, and takes the bus. She has a library card and a gym membership, that's it." Julian opened the file. A blurry photo of her walking out of a grocery store. She looked ordinary. Boring, even. But Julian remembered the shift, the way she dodged the shotgun stock. That wasn't luck. That was muscle memory. That was training. "She knew the safety was on," Julian murmured, "and she knew I was armed." "How do you know that?" Marcus asked, pouring himself a drink. "Because she slid the shotgun to me," Julian replied. "She identified the threat, the robbers, and she identified the asset, me. She triangulated the room in seconds. Marcus, regular waitresses don't do that. Soldiers do. Hitmen do." "You think she's a plant, the Russos?" Marcus asked, referring to the rival family encroaching on the south side. "If the Russos had someone that talented, I'd be dead already," Julian said. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "I'm going back." "Boss, it's risky. The cops are probably still sniffing around." "I need to know," Julian said, his eyes cold. "You don't find a diamond in a landfill and just leave it there." Julian returned to the Midnight Fork at the same time, 11:40 p.m. The diner was quieter tonight. The robbery had scared off the regulars. Elena was there, wiping the same spot on the counter. When the bell rang, she didn't look up, but her posture stiffened imperceptibly. Julian sat in the same booth. She walked over. No notepad. "You're back," she said. "The coffee was good." Julian lied. It was terrible. "You're not a cop," she stated. It wasn't a question. "No." "And you're not a reporter." "No." "Then you should leave," Elena said, her voice dropping an octave. "People like you. You bring storms with you. I like the quiet." Julian reached into his pocket. He pulled out a business card. It was heavy black cardstock with gold embossing. Just a number. No name. "I have a proposition for you, Elena." She laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "I don't do private parties." "I'm not looking for a date," Julian said, his voice hardening. "I saw what you did last night. The weight shift, the psychological de-escalation, the situational awareness. You're wasted pouring coffee for truckers." Elena stopped wiping the table. She leaned in close, her face inches from his. He could smell her perfume, vanilla, and something sharp like gunpowder. "Listen to me carefully, Mr. Suit," she whispered. "You think you saw something special? You saw a tired woman who wanted to go home. Don't dig. You might not like what you find buried in the dirt." "I'm a construction magnate," Julian smirked. "Digging is what I do." "I know who you are, Julian Moretti," she said. The air in the diner froze. Julian's hand twitched toward his belt. Nobody used his full name in public. "If you know who I am," Julian said softly, "then you know you don't walk away from me." "I'm not walking away," Elena said, standing up straight. "I'm working, and you're loitering. Buy a slice of pie or get out." Julian stared at her. The audacity. It was intoxicating. "Blueberry," he said. As she turned to cut the pie, the front window of the diner shattered. It wasn't a robbery this time. A Molotov cocktail sailed through the broken glass, smashing against the back wall. Flames erupted instantly, licking up the grease-stained wallpaper. "Out the back!" Julian shouted, vaulting over the table. He expected to have to drag her. He expected panic. Instead, as the fire alarm began to shriek, he saw Elena grab her coat and a distinct, heavy canvas bag from behind the counter. She didn't run away from the fire. She grabbed the fire extinguisher, sprayed a path to the kitchen, and kicked the back door open with a force that splintered the wood. They spilled out into the rainy alleyway. Black SUVs were screeching to a halt at both ends of the alley. Men in suits were pouring out, guns drawn. They weren't cops. They were Russo soldiers. "Looks like your storm found me," Elena spat, looking at the blocked exits. "Stay behind me," Julian commanded, drawing his Sig Sauer. "You're out of ammo," Elena said. "What? You didn't reload after you cleaned it last night? I can tell by the weight distribution in your jacket. You're carrying a paperweight." Julian checked. She was right. He had swapped magazines in the car, but hadn't chambered a round. He was 2 seconds behind. The Russo soldiers raised their weapons. "Drop it, Moretti!" one of them shouted. Elena sighed. She reached into her heavy canvas bag. "Duck," she said. "What? I said duck." Julian instinctively crouched. Elena didn't pull out a gun. She pulled out 3 throwing knives. In a blur of motion that Julian's eyes could barely track, she released them. Thwip, thwip, thwip. 3 men dropped, clutching their hands and shoulders. They weren't lethal hits, they were disabling hits. Surgical. "Run," she said, grabbing Julian's expensive Italian tie and yanking him toward a chain-link fence. As they scrambled over the fence and disappeared into the labyrinth of Chicago's back streets, Julian realized 2 things. First, his war with the Russos had just begun. Second, the waitress wasn't just a soldier. She was something far worse. She was a cleaner, and she had just cleaned up his mess. The safe house wasn't a bunker. It was a penthouse overlooking the Chicago River, encased in bulletproof glass and accessed by a private elevator that required a retinal scan. Julian shoved his thumb against the biometric scanner, and the steel doors slid open. He all but dragged Elena inside, his adrenaline fading into a cold, hard anger. "Marcus!" Julian roared into the empty expanse of the apartment. "Get the medical kit and secure the perimeter. We've been burned." Marcus appeared from the hallway, gun drawn, looking confused. He saw the waitress from the diner standing in the middle of the $1 million living room, dripping wet, holding a canvas bag that looked like it had survived a war zone. "The waitress?" Marcus asked, holstering his weapon but keeping his hand near it. "Boss, why is the waitress here, and why do you smell like smoke?" "Because the waitress just saved my life while you were sitting here watching sports," Julian snapped. He threw his ruined jacket onto the leather sofa. "The Russos hit the diner. Molotovs. Kill squad." Elena didn't speak. She walked calmly to the window, peering through the blinds. She was calculating sightlines. Snipers. Drones. "You're bleeding," she said without turning around. Julian looked down. A shard of glass from the diner window had sliced his forearm. It wasn't deep, but it was messy. "I'm fine," Julian grunted. "Sit down," Elena commanded. She dropped her canvas bag on the coffee table. Marcus stepped forward, his chest puffed out. "Hey, sweetie, you don't give orders here. You're lucky the boss didn't leave you in the alley. Now hand over the bag. Standard procedure. I need to search it." Elena looked at Marcus. It was the look a lion gives a yapping dog. "Touch the bag and you lose a finger." Marcus laughed. He was 6'4", an ex-linebacker who broke kneecaps for a living. He reached for the canvas strap. "I'm trembling. Give me the—" The movement was a blur. Elena didn't punch him. She grabbed his reaching hand, twisted the wrist at an unnatural angle, and applied pressure to a nerve cluster in his forearm. Marcus dropped to his knees with a strangled yelp, his face turning red. "I said," Elena whispered, leaning down to his level. "Don't touch the bag." Julian watched, leaning against the kitchen island. He didn't intervene. He was too busy being impressed. "Let him go, Elena," Julian said softly. "He's useful." She released Marcus, who scrambled back, cradling his arm and looking at her with pure terror. "She's a witch," Marcus wheezed. "She's a professional," Julian corrected. "Now go check the security feeds." Marcus retreated, giving Elena a wide berth. Elena opened her bag. She didn't pull out weapons. She pulled out a suture kit antiseptic and a bottle of high-end vodka. "Shirt off," she said to Julian. Julian sat on the sofa. As she cleaned the wound on his arm, the sting of the alcohol didn't make him flinch. He watched her face. She was beautiful, yes, but in a severe, dangerous way. "Who trained you?" Julian asked. "Mossad CIA Directorate." Elena didn't look up as she threaded a needle. "Does it matter?" "It matters because the Russo family just tried to burn us alive. They don't send hit squads for coffee girls. They knew you were there." Elena paused. She tied off the stitch and snipped the thread. "They weren't there for you, Julian. They were there for me." The silence in the room was heavy. "Why?" Julian asked. "Because 3 years ago, I stole something from Lorenzo Russo," Elena said, standing up and wiping her hands. "Something worth more than money. Something he would burn this whole city to the ground to get back." "What did you steal?" Elena reached into her bag again. She pulled out a small silver flash drive. His ledger, she said. Not the financial one. The real one. The names of every judge, senator, and cop on his payroll. The locations of his trafficking hubs. The evidence of every murder he ordered in the last decade. Julian stared at the drive. It was a nuclear bomb. With that drive, he could dismantle his biggest rival overnight. He could own Chicago. "Why do you have it?" Julian asked. "And why haven't you used it?" "I was his head of security," Elena revealed. Julian froze. The rumors. There were stories of a woman who stood at Lorenzo Russo's right hand, a ghost who cleaned up his worst messes. They called her La Ombra, the shadow. "You're the shadow," Julian whispered. "I was," Elena corrected, until he ordered a hit on a family, a civilian family. Kids involved. I refused. He tried to kill me. I took his insurance policy and ran. I've been waiting for the right moment to use it. Or for someone strong enough to help me finish him. She looked at Julian, her blue eyes piercing him. "I saved you tonight because I need a partner, Julian. I can't take down the Russos alone. I have the bullet, but I need a gun. You're the gun." Julian stood up. The pain in his arm was gone, replaced by the thrill of the game. He walked over to her, closing the distance until they were inches apart. "I'm not a gun, Elena," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm the hand that pulls the trigger. If we do this, we do it my way. No secrets, no holding back. We burn Lorenzo Russo to the ground." Elena smiled a small, dangerous curve of her lips. "Deal." "But first," Julian said, looking at her diner uniform stained with soot and coffee, "we need to get you something to wear. Tomorrow night is the Sapphire Gala. Lorenzo will be there, and we're going to walk in through the front door." The Sapphire Gala was the kind of event where champagne cost more than a car, and the smiles were sharper than knives. The ballroom of the Drake Hotel was filled with Chicago's elite politicians, CEOs, and the mobsters who owned them. Julian Moretti entered the room in a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. But nobody was looking at him. Every eye was on the woman on his arm. Elena. Gone was the tired waitress in the polyester uniform. In her place was a vision. She wore a floor-length gown of emerald green silk, backless, that clung to her athletic frame. Her hair was swept up, revealing the elegant curve of her neck. She didn't walk. She glided. "Keep your head up," Julian murmured as they descended the grand staircase. "They smell fear." "I don't have fear," Elena replied quietly, her hand resting lightly on his forearm. "I have a Sig Sauer strapped to my thigh under this dress." "Good girl." They moved through the crowd. The tension was palpable. Everyone knew the Morettis and the Russos were on the brink of war. For Julian to show up here was a provocation. "Well, well, if it isn't the garbage man," a shrill voice cut through the hum of conversation. Julian stopped. Blocking their path was Clarissa Van Doren, the daughter of a corrupt senator, and a woman who thought her money made her royalty. She was holding a glass of red wine, looking at Elena with open disdain. "And who is this?" Clarissa sneered, looking Elena up and down. "I didn't know you were hiring escorts now, Julian. Or did you pick her up from a shelter?" A circle formed around them. The room went quiet. This was the social execution everyone lived for. Elena smiled. It was the same calm smile she wore when the shotgun was in her face. "I'm Elena," she said politely. "Elena," Clarissa mocked. "Just Elena." "Name, let me guess. You're aspiring. An aspiring actress, model. Let me give you some advice, honey. You don't belong here." This silk. It looks cheap on you. You have the hands of a worker." Clarissa accidentally tilted her glass. Red wine splashed onto the skirt of Elena's emerald dress. The crowd gasped. Julian stepped forward, his eyes flashing with fury. But Elena stopped him with a touch. Elena looked down at the stain, then back at Clarissa. "You're right, Clarissa," Elena said, her voice projecting clearly across the silent room. "I do have the hands of a worker. These hands have worked harder in a day than you have in your entire life." She stepped closer to the socialite. "And regarding the wine," Eleanor continued, sniffing the air, "it's a 2018 Bordeaux blend, heavy on the Merlot. Decent, but hardly worth ruining a dress over. However, since we're critiquing appearances, that diamond on your neck—" Elena pointed to the massive pendant Clarissa was wearing. "It's a cubic zirconium composite, high quality, likely from the Antwerp labs, but fake. The refraction index is off. I assume Daddy's campaign funds are running low." Clarissa turned pale. She clutched the necklace. "You lie. This is real." And Elena switched effortlessly into flawless French. "Votre accent est atroce, chérie. Si vous voulez insulter les gens en français, apprenez d'abord la grammaire. Your accent is atrocious, darling. If you want to insult people in French, learn grammar first." Clarissa, who prided herself on her Parisian education, turned a deep shade of crimson. The Senator Clarissa's father stepped in, looking mortified. "Clarissa, that's enough. Go to the car." Clarissa fled, tears in her eyes. The crowd murmured, impressed. The escort had just verbally decapitated the meanest girl in Chicago. "Remind me never to piss you off in French," Julian whispered, guiding her away. "I speak 4 languages," Elena said. "It helps when you're negotiating with international smugglers." Suddenly the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Lorenzo Russo stood at the other end of the ballroom. He was a small man, with eyes like a shark. He was surrounded by 4 bodyguards. He saw Julian. He smiled. Then his gaze shifted to Elena. The smile vanished. The glass in his hand shattered, cutting his palm. "You," Lorenzo whispered. Elena didn't flinch. She stared directly at the man who had hunted her for 3 years. She raised her champagne glass in a mock toast. Lorenzo marched toward them, ignoring his bleeding hand. His bodyguards scrambled to keep up. "You have some nerve, Julian," Lorenzo spat, stopping 3 feet away. "Bringing a thief into my house." "This isn't your house, Lorenzo," Julian said calmly. "It's a hotel, and Elena is with me." "She's dead property," Lorenzo hissed, his eyes locked on Elena. "You think you can hide behind him, Ombra? I made you. I can unmake you." "You tried last night," Elena said, her voice ice cold. "You missed. You're getting sloppy, Lorenzo. Old age." Lorenzo lunged. Julian stepped in between them, his chest bumping Lorenzo's. "Touch her," Julian said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the air. "And I will carve you up right here, in front of the senator, the mayor, and your mother." The bodyguards reached for their jackets. Julian's security team, led by Marcus, materialized from the crowd guns visible under their coats. It was a standoff in the middle of a black tie gala. Lorenzo laughed a dry, rattling sound. He stepped back. "Enjoy the party, Julian," Lorenzo said, wiping his bloody hand on a napkin. "Enjoy the girl, because by sunrise you'll both be dog food. You have something that belongs to me, and I'm coming to take it." "Come and try," Julian challenged. Lorenzo turned and walked away. "We need to leave," Elena said instantly. "Now!" Why, we won, Julian said. No. Elena said, her eyes scanning the exits. He didn't threaten us. He stalled us. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his watch. As if on cue, the lights in the ballroom flickered and died. Total darkness. Down! Elena screamed. Gunfire erupted from the balcony above. The ballroom turned into a slaughterhouse of panic. Screams, shattering glass, and the strobe light flashes of muzzle fire from the balcony. Julian didn't think. He reacted. He tackled Elena, covering her body with his own, as bullets chewed up the parquet floor where they had been standing seconds ago. "Service exit kitchen!" Julian shouted over the noise. Marcus and his team returned fire, suppressing the shooters on the balcony. "Go, go, go!" Marcus yelled, waving Julian toward the swinging kitchen doors. Julian and Elena scrambled on hands and knees, shards of glass slicing into their palms. They burst into the kitchen. Chefs were cowering under stainless steel tables. "The back alley is compromised," Elena said, hiking up her dress to retrieve the Sig Sauer from her thigh holster. "Lorenzo's standard play. Hammer and anvil. Shooters inside flush the target out. Heavy hitters outside wait for the kill. We go up," Julian decided. "Roof, helicopter." They sprinted for the service elevator. Julian punched the button for the roof. The doors slid shut just as 3 men with submachine guns burst into the kitchen. Bullets pinged off the closing steel doors. "That was too close." Julian exhaled, checking his own weapon. He looked at Elena. She was calm. Too calm. "Elena, are you hit?" "No," she said. She was staring at the floor numbers ticking up. "Lorenzo is desperate," Julian said. "He fired into a crowd of civilians. He's finished. Once we release that drive, he's done." "Julian," Elena said softly, "the drive isn't encrypted." "What?" "The flash drive. It doesn't have a password. You can upload it the second we get a signal." "Good. Then tonight ends with his arrest." The elevator dinged. Roof level. The doors opened to the windy, rain-swept helipad. Julian's private chopper was there, the rotors already spinning. The pilot was waving them over. They ran across the wet concrete heads ducked against the rotor wash. Julian opened the cabin door and helped Elena in. He climbed in after her. "Get us out of here," Julian yelled to the pilot. The chopper lifted off, banking sharp over the Chicago skyline. The city lights were a blur below them. Julian leaned back, adrenaline crashing. He looked at Elena. She was staring out the window, her expression unreadable. "We made it," Julian said, reaching for her hand. She pulled her hand away. "Julian," she said, her voice shaking for the first time. "I need to tell you something." "It can wait," Julian said. "We're safe." "No, it can't." She turned to him. Her eyes were filled with tears. "The robbery at the diner. It wasn't the first time I saw you." Julian frowned. "What do you mean? 3 years ago, when I left Lorenzo, I didn't just leave. I made a deal to buy my freedom." Julian felt a cold pit form in his stomach. "What kind of deal?" "Lorenzo told me I could walk away if I did one last job. One final hit." She reached into her dress and pulled out a photo. It was crinkled and old. She handed it to Julian. It was a photo of Julian taken 3 years ago, walking out of his office. There was a red crosshair drawn over his heart. "I was sent to kill you, Julian," Elena whispered. "I sat in that diner for 3 years because I knew you came there every Tuesday. I was supposed to put a bullet in your head and earn my freedom." Julian stared at the photo, then at her. The woman he had just saved. The woman he was starting to fall for. "You were the hitman," Julian said, his voice devoid of emotion. Yes. Why didn't you do it? Because I watched you, she said. I saw how you treated people. I saw that you weren't like Lorenzo. You had honor, and I couldn't do it. So I stayed. I watched over you. I became your shadow without you knowing. Julian's hand moved to his gun. Is this a trap, Elena? Are you leading me to a slaughter right now? No, she cried. I'm telling you because I can't lie to you anymore. Lorenzo knows I didn't take the shot. That's why he wants us both dead. He thinks we're conspiring. Julian looked at the pilot. Take us to the warehouse district. Sector 4. Boss, the pilot asked, confused. That's abandoned. Do it, Julian roared. He turned back to Elena. The trust was broken. The romance was shattered. Give me your gun, Julian ordered. Elena hesitated. Then slowly she handed him her Sig Sauer. When we land, Julian said, his eyes hard as flint, you're going into a cell until I verify every word of this. If you're lying, if you're still working for him. I'm not, she pleaded. We'll see. The helicopter descended into the dark industrial wasteland of Chicago, but as they touched down, Julian's phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus. Do not land. Pilot is compromised. Rosso payroll. Julian looked up. The pilot was flipping switches, locking the doors electronically. He turned around, a suppressed pistol in his hand, aimed directly at Julian's chest. Sorry, Mr. Moretti, the pilot said with a smirk. Lorenzo offered double. The pilot pulled the trigger. Click. Nothing happened. The pilot looked at his gun in confusion. Elena spoke from the seat beside Julian. I removed the firing pin from your backup piece before we took off. You really should check your equipment. The pilot's eyes widened. Julian didn't hesitate. He lunged into the cockpit. The cockpit was a cage of screaming metal and flashing alarms. Julian's fist connected with the pilot's jaw, a sickening crunch that silenced the traitor instantly. The pilot slumped over the collective pitch stick, sending the helicopter into a violent, spiraling dive. Pull him back! Elena screamed, unbuckling her harness. The G-force slammed them against the seats. The horizon was spinning dark industrial warehouses, wet asphalt, and the unforgiving ground rushing up to meet them. Julian grabbed the pilot by the collar and hauled his unconscious body off the controls, but the bird was too low, falling too fast. Brace! Julian roared, reaching across the gap to cover Elena's head with his arm. The impact was like the end of the world. The skids caught the edge of a rusted warehouse roof, shearing off. The fuselage slammed into the gravel lot below, rolling twice before coming to a grinding, sparking halt against a concrete pillar. Silence followed. Heavy, ringing silence. Julian coughed, the taste of copper in his mouth. His vision swam. The cabin was sideways. Rain was pouring in through the shattered windshield. Elena, he croaked. I'm here, she whispered. Her voice was strained. Julian turned his head. Elena was hanging from her harness, cut and bruised but alive. She was already working on the buckle. She dropped to the ceiling, which was now the floor, and crawled over to him. We have to move, she said, her hands trembling slightly as she checked him for broken bones. Fuel leak. And... Look. Julian looked through the spider-webbed glass. Headlights. Dozens of them. Black SUVs were circling the crash site like vultures. Men were getting out, armed men. In the center of the formation stood a familiar figure holding a cane. Lorenzo Russo. He was waiting for the drop, Julian realized, wincing as he unbuckled. His ribs were definitely cracked. The pilot was bringing us right to him. We can't fight them, Julian, Elena said. We have one gun. 3 bullets. There are 30 of them. Julian looked at her. In the dim light of the dashboard, with blood on her forehead and her dress torn, she looked fierce and terrified. Not for herself, but for him. "You said you were sent to kill me," Julian said, his voice rough. "Why didn't you let me die just now? You could have bailed out." Elena gripped his face with both hands, forcing him to look at her. "Because I don't want freedom if it means living in a world without you. I didn't take the shot 3 years ago because I fell in love with you, Julian. I watched you from that counter every Tuesday for 1,000 days. I cleaned up your messes from the shadows because I couldn't stand the thought of anyone hurting you." She kissed him. It tasted of blood and rain and desperation. "If we die tonight," she whispered against his lips, "I need you to know that. I am yours. I have always been yours." Julian looked at her, the anger washing away, replaced by a fierce, burning resolve. He reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out the silver flash drive, the evidence that could bury Russo. "We aren't dying tonight," Julian said. "Do you trust me? With my life." "Then we have to play a game," Julian said, handing her the empty gun. "A dangerous one." Outside, the voice of Lorenzo Russo boomed over a megaphone. "Come out, Julian. It's over. The architects have fallen. Come out and die like a man, or I'll burn that wreck with you inside." Julian kicked the door open. He stumbled out into the rain, his hands raised. "Hold for hell!" Lorenzo shouted, laughing. "Look at him! The king of Chicago crawling out of the garbage." Julian limped forward. He looked defeated, broken. "You win, Lorenzo," Julian shouted over the rain. "You win." "Where is the girl?" Lorenzo demanded. "Dead," Julian lied. "Crash killed her." Lorenzo sneered. "Pity. I wanted to kill her myself. Now, give me the drive, Julian. Give it to me, and I might let you live long enough to watch me take your city." Julian reached into his pocket. He pulled out the silver drive. He held it up the metal, glinting in the headlights. "Come and get it," Julian said. Lorenzo signaled his men. 2 guards approached Julian, weapons trained on his chest. They snatched the drive and brought it to Lorenzo. Lorenzo plugged it into a ruggedized military tablet his assistant was holding. He waited for the files to load. He smiled. "Everything," Lorenzo breathed, scrolling through the files. "Every bribe. Every body. It's all here." He looked up at Julian, his eyes manic with triumph. "You kept good records, Ombra, but you forgot one thing. Evidence only matters if there's someone left to see it." Lorenzo pulled a gold-plated revolver from his coat. He aimed it at Julian's head. "Goodbye, architect." Click. The hammer fell on an empty chamber. Lorenzo frowned. He pulled the trigger again. Click. "What so is this?" Lorenzo screamed, looking at the gun. "It's called the long game, Lorenzo." A female voice cut through the darkness. Elena stepped out from the wreckage. She wasn't dead, and she wasn't holding a gun. She was holding a cell phone. "While you were gloating," Elena said, her voice steady and loud, "you plugged that drive into a device connected to the 4G network." "So what?" Lorenzo spat. "That drive wasn't just storage," Elena explained, walking to stand beside Julian. "It was a trigger. The moment you accessed the files, it automatically uploaded them. Not to the police, to the server of every major news network in America. CNN, Fox, BBC. They just got a live feed of your ledger." Lorenzo's face went white. "You're lying." "Check your phone," Julian said, crossing his arms. The pain in his ribs seemed to vanish. Lorenzo's men started checking their phones. Murmurs of panic rippled through the ranks. "Boss," one of the guards said, his voice trembling. "It's on the news, right now. They're showing the photos, the invoices with your signature. They're calling it the Russo leaks." In the distance, the wail of sirens began. Not one or two sirens. A chorus. The entire Chicago PD, the FBI, and probably the National Guard were descending on the industrial district. "Kill them!" Lorenzo shrieked, pointing his useless gold gun at Julian. "Kill them all!" But his men didn't shoot. They looked at the sirens. They looked at the news reports on their phones. They looked at the falling empire. "It's over, Lorenzo," the head guard said. He dropped his rifle. "I'm not going to prison for a dead man." One by one, the Russo soldiers dropped their weapons. They ran into the night, fleeing the sinking ship. Lorenzo stood alone in the rain, holding a tablet that contained his own destruction. Julian walked up to him. He didn't hit him. He didn't need to. He simply took the tablet from Lorenzo's shaking hands. "The waitress says hello," Julian whispered. Then the police floodlights swept over the lot, blinding them. 6 months later. The rain in Chicago was different now. It didn't smell like rust and old pennies anymore. It smelled like wet pavement and new beginnings. The Midnight Fork was still standing on the corner of 5th and Main, but it was no longer the greasy spoon where truck drivers stopped for a $3 slice of pie. The neon sign that used to flicker ominously had been replaced by a tasteful static glow. The windows were bulletproof, tinted against the prying eyes of the paparazzi. The "Closed for private event" sign hung permanently on the door. Inside the transformation was absolute. Julian Moretti had bought the building 2 days after the crash. He hadn't demolished it. He had enshrined it. The cracked linoleum was replaced with imported Italian marble. The flickering fluorescent tubes were gone, replaced by warm amber pendant lights. But he had kept one thing exactly the same, booth 4. The table where he had first seen her. The table where she had slid him a shotgun and stolen his heart. Julian sat there now, nursing an espresso. He wasn't wearing his usual tactical gear or the heavy trench coats that hid a shoulder holster. He was wearing a navy cashmere sweater and reading the Wall Street Journal. The headline read, "Moretti Logistics acquires harbor rights, a new era for Chicago trade." There was no mention of the Mafia. No mention of bodies buried in foundations. Just Moretti Logistics. The transition from the underworld to the legitimate world had been bloody expensive and exhausting, but they had done it. The heavy oak door at the front opened. It wasn't kicked in by gunmen. It was opened by a security detail, ex-Navy SEALs on Julian's payroll, who held the door for a woman who now practically owned the city. Elena walked in. The transformation took Julian's breath away, even after waking up next to her for the last 180 days. Gone was the waitress uniform, stained with grease. Gone was the hunted look of a woman expecting a bullet. Elena wore a cream-colored power suit that screamed authority. Her blonde hair was styled in a sharp, elegant bob. She carried a leather briefcase, and on her finger a diamond ring the size of a quail's egg caught the amber light. She didn't walk like a waitress. She walked like a queen, entering her throne room. "You're late," Julian said, though his eyes were smiling. "I was about to send a search party." "I was busy," Elena said, sliding into the booth opposite him. She signaled the private chef in the back for water. The zoning commission was dragging their feet on the new community center in the south side. They claimed the permits were irregular. "Let me guess." Julian sipped his espresso. "You persuaded them." "I reminded Councilman Higgins that I know where his vacation home in the Caymans is, and exactly how he paid for it, using campaign funds. Elena said casually, thanking the chef who placed a crystal glass of water in front of her. Suddenly the permits were signed. Construction starts Monday. Julian chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated in his chest. You're terrifying, Mrs. Moretti. You know we're supposed to be legitimate now. That sounds like extortion. It's aggressive negotiation, Elena corrected with a smirk. Besides, the center is for at-risk youth. I'm using my powers for good. It's a tax write-off. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. It was a luxury they had earned. The last 6 months had been a war of a different kind. The Russo leaks had decimated their rivals. The FBI had swept through the city, cleaning out the rot. Julian and Elena had navigated the chaos perfectly, cutting deals, flipping assets, and emerging as the untouchable power couple of Chicago. But the scars were still there. Julian unconsciously rubbed his ribs where they had been broken in the crash. Elena sometimes flinched when a car backfired. You don't walk through fire without getting singed. Marcus called. Julian said, his tone shifting to business. The remnants of the Russo family in New York. They tried to make a move on our shipping containers in Jersey. Elena's eyes sharpened. The shadow wasn't gone. She was just dormant. Do I need to fly to New York? No. Julian shook his head. Marcus handled it. He sent them the security footage of what you did to their boss in the diner. Just the video file. No message. They withdrew within the hour. Smart. Elena nodded. Fear is a better currency than gold. It lasts longer. We're safe, Elena, Julian said softly, reaching across the marble table to cover her hand with his. I promised you. No more running. No more looking over your shoulder. We own the board now. Elena looked at him. She looked at the man who had been a target, then a partner, and now her husband. She thought about the 3 years she spent watching him from behind the counter, forcing herself not to love him because she was supposed to kill him. I don't miss the adrenaline, she admitted, turning her hand to interlace her fingers with his. I don't miss the silence of an empty apartment. But I worry. About what? About what comes next, Elena said. We've conquered the enemies. We've built the business. We have the money, the power, the respect. But what is it all for Julian? Who do we leave it to? A trust fund? The state? Julian frowned. It was a question he had avoided. Men like him didn't usually plan for legacy. They planned for survival. We have time, Elena. We're young. We have the world to explore first. Paris, Tokyo, Rome. We can still do Paris. Elena said, a strange, nervous smile playing on her lips. But we might need to adjust the itinerary. Why? Julian asked. Is there a threat? No threat, she said. Just a complication. She reached into her designer purse. Her hand lingered there for a moment. The woman who could dismantle a pistol in 5 seconds, blinded the woman who had stared down a Mafia don without blinking, was shaking. She pulled out a small, rectangular velvet box. It looked like a jewelry box. She slid it across the table, past the espresso cup, past the water glass, until it rested in front of Julian. What is this? Julian asked. I already have a watch. Open it, Elena whispered. Julian opened the box. Inside, resting on the black velvet, was not a watch or cufflinks or a key to a new car. It was a positive pregnancy test. 2 distinct pink lines. The architect froze. Julian Moretti, the man who could calculate logistics for global shipping lanes in his head, who could predict his enemy's moves 3 steps in advance, stared at the plastic stick in utter baffling silence. The diner seemed to tilt. The sounds of the city outside faded into a dull hum. "You—" Julian started, his voice cracking. He looked up at her. "Us. The doctor confirmed it this morning." Elena said, tears welling in her blue eyes, spilling over onto her cheeks. 8 weeks. We're going to have a baby, Julian." Julian stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the marble floor. He looked at Elena, then back at the test, then back at Elena. The realization hit him like a freight train. A child, an heir, a life that wouldn't have to hide in the shadows, a life that wouldn't know the sound of a gunshot or the cold of a prison cell. "A baby," he whispered the word, feeling foreign and holy on his tongue. "We're going to need a bigger safe house." Elena laughed through her tears, wiping her face. "And I'm going to need to redesign the nursery. I'm thinking bulletproof glass, just in case." "No," Julian said firmly, walking around the table. "No bulletproof glass. This child won't need it. Because this child will have us." He pulled Elena to her feet and crushed her into a hug, lifting her off the ground. For the first time in his life, the weight on his shoulders wasn't the burden of a crime family or the guilt of the past. It was the weight of the future, and it was light. He set her down and cupped her face, kissing her deeply. It wasn't a desperate kiss in the rain after a crash. It was a promise. "You realize what this means," Julian said, resting his forehead against hers. "That I get fat, and you have to do all the late-night feedings," Elena teased. "It means we won," Julian said fiercely. "Lorenzo wanted to end our line. He wanted to wipe us out. But we're still here. And now there will be more of us. This is the real victory, Elena. Creating something that outlasts the darkness." Elena smiled, resting her hand on her stomach. "The architect and the shadow. I wonder what kind of kid we'll make." "A troublemaker." Julian laughed. "Definitely a troublemaker." He looked out the window at the Chicago skyline. The city lights were twinkling in the twilight. It was his city. But looking back at his wife, he realized the city was just concrete and steel. His world was standing right in front of him. "Come on," Julian said, grabbing his coat. "Let's go home." "Home," Elena repeated. They walked out of the diner hand in hand. The security team fell into formation, but they kept their distance. The couple didn't look like they needed protection. They looked invincible. The waitress who stayed calm during a robbery had stunned the world with her composure. She had saved the Mafia boss. She had destroyed an empire. But as they stepped into the cool night air, Elena knew that her greatest story wasn't the one about violence or revenge. It was the story beginning right now. Wow. What a journey. From a humble diner waitress to the queen of the Chicago underworld. Elena didn't just survive. She rewrote the entire game. It really makes you think about the people we walk past every day. That quiet guy on the bus. The barista serving your latte. You never know what kind of story they're hiding behind their eyes. I want to know what you think. Did Elena do the right thing by hiding the truth from Julian for 3 years? Or should she have told him sooner? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of romance, betrayal, and instant karma, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. We have a crazy revenge drama coming up next week, involving a cheating CEO and a lottery ticket that you do not want to miss. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, and remember, sometimes the quietest people have the loudest storms inside them. See you in the next video.